I did start to slide, but he left me no recourse because there was no place to slide, and there's no sense in ever sliding into a bag if you can't get the bag.
You know Pete Rose, the guy who racked up more hits than anyone in baseball history? A legend on the field, but a villain in the rule book. And now, even after his death, his name still sparks one of the biggest debates in sports. The reason is because for 40 years, Pete Rose has been locked out of the Hall of Fame. Banned. Exiled. Why? Because he bet on baseball. And yet today, the same league that banned him for gambling, they're making millions from sports books. So what's the deal? If gambling was Pete Rose's crime, how can MLB now embrace it? And more importantly, is it finally time to let baseball's all-time hit king into the Hall of Fame? Pete Rose, baseball's all-time hit leader, left behind one of the sport's most controversial legacies. His relentless hustle, unmatched competitiveness, and undeniable skill made him an icon of America's pastime. Yet his lifetime ban from baseball is something Pete Rose's legacy continues to try to evade, even in death. Despite his passing, the debate over his reinstatement has not faded.
You play for one reason, and one reason only. You don't play baseball for exercise. You play the game to win the game.
Yeah.
You take a test to get an A, not a C. You play the game to win the game. I mean, that's why I won the most games in the history of baseball. That was my philosophy.
In fact, it has only intensified. Shortly after his death, Rose's family and his lawyer, Jeffrey Lenkov, formally petitioned MLB for his reinstatement, making another push to have him enshrined among baseball's greatest legends. Even beyond the legal filings, a new voice entered the conversation last week, U.S. President Donald Trump, who announced his intent to posthumously pardon Rose. Rose spent 5 months in prison in the early 1990s for tax evasion.
First, we have a list of pardons and commutations relating to events that occurred on January 6, 2021.
Okay, and how many people is this?
I think this order will apply to approximately 1,500 people, sir.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
With President Trump injecting himself into the debate, this lifts Rose's case to a higher level that overlaps baseball and sparks a political, cultural, and ethical debate. At its core, this issue forces us to ask fundamental questions about forgiveness, evolving societal norms, and MLB's changing relationship with sports betting. If Pete Rose remains exiled from the Hall of Fame while the league simultaneously profits from legalized gambling, does that not expose a contradiction within the sport? Or does MLB's rigid stance serve as an essential safeguard, preventing corruption and maintaining the game's integrity? Pete Rose was known for his unmatched grit and tenacity. Pete Rose famously collided with Ray Fosse in a play at the plate that separated Fosse's shoulder in the 1970 All-Star Game. He played more games and has had more at-bats than anyone in Major League history. Rose embodied the spirit of baseball, earning the nickname Charlie Hustle. Over a 24-year playing career, his records, championships, and hustle defined what it meant to play hard. Now in 2025, Rose's legacy is back in the spotlight. MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred has signaled a possible reconsideration of Rose's ban, marking a dramatic shift in a case that has remained stagnant for over 3 decades. As baseball enters an era where legalized gambling is embraced and monetized, questions about fairness, consistency, and the true purpose of the Hall of Fame have resurfaced. The final decision on Pete Rose's fate will not only determine his legacy, but may reshape the way baseball views integrity and redemption. To fully understand this debate, we must examine both sides of the argument, the reasons why Rose remains banned, and the growing momentum for his Hall of Fame inclusion. To explore these questions, we must examine the arguments both for and against Pete Rose's Hall of Fame inclusion. To really get why Pete Rose is banned from the Hall of Fame, we need to go back. Because baseball and gambling, it's been a messy relationship for over a century. It all started with the 1919 Black Sox scandal. 8 players from the Chicago White Sox were accused of throwing the World Series for a payday. Major League Baseball panicked, banned them for life, and made one thing clear. Gambling on baseball is the ultimate sin. How could the very integrity of America's favorite sport be so easily compromised? Could the game ever be trusted again? The aftermath, a sport on the brink of collapse. In response to this catastrophe, MLB's newly appointed first commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, took decisive action. Landis made gambling the ultimate sin in baseball, instituting zero-tolerance policies to prevent a similar scandal from ever happening again. Landis worked to restore public faith in baseball, vowing that no player, coach, or manager would ever be allowed to compromise the legitimacy of the sport. For MLB, this was not simply about punishing those involved. It was about protecting the game's reputation at all costs. The league could not afford another scandal. This was the context in which Rule 21D was created, the very rule that Pete Rose would later violate. MLB introduced Rule 21D, a law so absolute that it left no room for ambiguity. Any player, umpire, or club, or league official or employee who shall bet any sum whatsoever upon any baseball game in connection with which the bettor has a duty to perform shall be declared permanently ineligible. This was not merely a rule, it was a warning, a commandment, a death sentence for anyone caught violating it. And to ensure that no one could claim ignorance, MLB ordered the rule to be posted in every single clubhouse in the league. Players, managers, and coaches could not set foot inside their own locker rooms without seeing the stern reminder that gambling on baseball meant exile, permanent and unforgiving. To some, these punishments may seem excessive, but baseball's strict approach to gambling was not without reason. The league had long memories, and the scars of 1919 had not faded. For baseball, there could be no gray area. There could be no innocent forms of gambling. If betting on baseball was tolerated, even in small doses, where would the line be drawn? There would be no second chances. There would be no exceptions. By the time Pete Rose was permanently banned in 1989, the precedent had been set for nearly 7 decades. There was no room for mitigating circumstances. There was only one reality. Gambling on baseball meant expulsion. Period. The same rule that had barred Joe Jackson from baseball in 1920 was the rule that ended Pete Rose's career in 1989. The difference? The world was changing. The strictest rule in baseball, the one meant to protect the game at all costs, was suddenly at odds with the very reality of modern sports. And that is where this story and all these details takes an interesting turn. The rise of legalized sports betting and MLB's shift. But something unexpected happened in the decades following Rose's exile. The world changed. For most of baseball's history, sports betting had been associated with crime and corruption. Bookmakers operated in secrecy, and illegal gambling rings ran unchecked. Betting on sports was seen as a threat to fairness, something that could easily be manipulated. But in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the federal ban on sports betting, allowing states to legalize and regulate it. Suddenly, what had once been an underground vice was now a booming, billion-dollar industry. Instead of fighting against this cultural shift, Major League Baseball did something unprecedented. It partnered with the very industry it had once condemned. The league signed deals with DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM, allowing them to be official gambling partners of MLB. Fans were now encouraged to place bets from their seats at stadiums, with in-game betting options displayed on stadium screens. Baseball's broadcast partners regularly promoted gambling lines, and pregame shows often included betting analysis. In examining Pete Rose's case for the Hall of Fame, this substantially changed the lens we should view his status. The same league that had banished him for life was now actively profiting from the very activity that led to his downfall. This raises serious questions about the fairness of the Pete Rose banishment. If baseball now encourages and profits from gambling, why is Pete Rose still banned for doing the same thing? If MLB now embraces sports betting, does this mean its previous hardline stance was misguided? Should past punishments be reconsidered in light of this dramatic cultural shift? To many, the answer seems clear. Let's now examine both sides of the argument to determine if Pete Rose should be allowed on the Hall of Fame ballot for a vote. The argument against Pete Rose's Hall of Fame entry. To conduct a fair, unbiased analysis of the Pete Rose debate, we must start with the argument and the reasons why Pete Rose should continue to be left off the Hall of Fame ballot. The first reason is the rule is crystal clear. Any player, umpire, or official who bets on baseball will be permanently ineligible. Pete Rose wasn't fixing games, but as a manager, his bets could have influenced lineups, pitching decisions, or strategy. Even if he only bet on his team to win, that still creates a conflict of interest, and MLB has always had zero tolerance for that. Secondly, he denied his wrongdoings for 15 years. For over a decade, Rose flat out denied betting on baseball.
You look in the camera now and say, I never bet on baseball, and I never bet on Cincinnati Red baseball.
Only in 2004, when he wrote My Prison Without Bars, did he finally admit it.
Did you bet on baseball?
Yes, I did, and that was my mistake, not coming clean a lot earlier.
By then, many felt his confession was more about selling books than showing remorse. Instead of taking responsibility, Rose dug himself deeper, making it harder for MLB to justify forgiving him. Thirdly, his reputation beyond gambling has been questioned. In 2017, allegations surfaced that he had a sexual relationship with a minor in the 1970s, something he later admitted to, though he claimed she was of legal age. While no criminal charges were filed, this further complicated his Hall of Fame case. For some, it's not just about baseball anymore, it's about ethics. The argument for Pete Rose's Hall of Fame. Entry. The arguments against Pete Rose being in the Hall of Fame are straightforward and compelling. The arguments considering his unparalleled on-field achievements are equally compelling because from a purely baseball perspective, Pete Rose's career is undeniably Hall of Fame worthy. All-time MLB hit leader, 4,256 hits. Three-time World Series champion. Three-time batting champion. National League MVP, 1973. 17-time All-Star across 5 different positions. Rose embodied the relentless, blue-collar work ethic that made baseball America's pastime. His playing style earned him the nickname Charlie Hustle, a testament to his fearless, gritty approach to the game. Excluding a player of Rose's caliber from the Hall of Fame creates an incomplete history of the sport. Many argue that the Hall should recognize on-field performance rather than serve as a moral arbiter. Changing public and institutional views on gambling. Perhaps the most compelling reason for Rose's reinstatement is MLB's own evolving stance on gambling. At the time of Rose's ban in 1989, sports betting was widely illegal and considered a major threat to baseball's credibility. Today, however, MLB actively profits from sports betting partnerships. This shift presents a fundamental contradiction. If gambling is now an integral part of the sport, should the league continue to exile its all-time hit leader for something that is now actively encouraged? Would the same punishment be handed down today? The stark contrast between Rose's era and today's MLB suggests that reevaluating his ban is both fair and necessary. MLB has a long history of forgiving and inducting players with controversial pasts. Steroid users like David Ortiz have been inducted, despite PED use being against the rules. Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa have been welcomed back into the baseball community, even if they still have gained entry into the Hall of Fame. Players accused of domestic violence, drug use, and cheating scandals are still eligible for induction. Rose's actions, while serious, do not fundamentally alter the statistical impact of his playing career. Many argue that if the Hall of Fame is meant to recognize the greatest contributors to baseball, excluding its all-time hit leader is an unnecessary omission. If Commissioner Manfred elected to remove the ban, it would still take 3 years before Rose would be voted on by the Hall of Fame voters. My intuition tells me he would be voted in if allowed on a ballot. And it's not just the league talking about it. Fans have been debating this for years. Back in the 90s, most people agreed, Pete Rose broke the rules, end of story. But today, nearly 75% of baseball fans think he should be in the Hall. Even baseball legends are speaking out. Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame. What he did on the field is more significant than anything else. Johnny Bench, If we're allowing steroid users into the hall, how can we justify keeping Pete out? Reggie Jackson. Baseball is about numbers, and Pete's numbers are undeniable. It's time to forgive and move on. So the question is, if the game has changed, why hasn't Pete Rose's fate? In recent years, we have seen a cultural shift toward forgiveness and redemption, with professional sports serving as the epicenter. Society has changed, and what was once considered an unforgivable sin is now viewed through a more compassionate lens. In recent years, other sports figures who have committed serious offenses have been forgiven and welcomed back into the fold. For younger MLB players, the Rose controversy is even more baffling. They have grown up in an era where sports betting is legal and widely accepted. Their own league actively promotes and profits from gambling. Gambling on sports is no longer seen as a crime or moral failing. To them, Pete Rose's continued exile feels like an outdated punishment from a different era. Many modern players have privately and publicly expressed confusion over why Rose remains banned while MLB itself is embracing the very thing that got him exiled. It is a contradiction that baseball will eventually have to resolve. And if history tells us anything, the tide may already have turned in Pete Rose's favor. The Trump factor, a political spotlight on baseball. In March 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump reignited the debate, stating he would issue a posthumous pardon for Pete Rose. Trump's statement was blunt and direct. Major League Baseball didn't have the courage or decency to put the late, great Pete Rose, also known as Charlie Hustle, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now he is dead, will never experience the thrill of being selected, even though he was a far better player than most of those who made it, and can only be named posthumously. What a shame. Anyway, over the next few weeks, I will be signing a complete pardon of Pete Rose, who shouldn't have been gambling on baseball, but only bet on his team winning. He never betted against himself or the other team. He had the most hits by far in baseball history and won more games than anyone in sports history. Baseball, which is dying all over the place, should get off its fat, lazy ass and elect Pete Rose, even though far too late, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. While Trump's pardon has no direct legal effect on MLB, it places immense pressure on Commissioner Rob Manfred to reconsider Rose's status. With public sentiment shifting, political figures weighing in, and MLB's evolving stance on gambling, could Pete Rose's final case finally lead to his Hall of Fame induction? Does the Hall of Fame exist to reflect history or to rewrite it? For 40 years, Pete Rose's ban has remained one of baseball's most unmovable rules. But the tide is turning. The question now is not whether Rose was right or wrong, but whether MLB can continue justifying his exclusion in an era where the league profits from gambling itself. If baseball's future is built on evolution, forgiveness, and historical accuracy, then perhaps the final chapter of Pete Rose's story will end in Cooperstown. Pete Rose has been locked out of the Hall of Fame for 40 years. Meanwhile, the league that banned him is making millions off the very thing that got him exiled. If baseball is about greatness, if it's about honoring those who shaped the game, then one thing is clear. It's time. It's time to bring Pete Rose home to the Hall of Fame.